If you are going through perimenopause or menopause at this stage of your life, you're noticing your body changing, your hormones feel out of whack, and on top of that, you have all of this body shame and this pressure to lose this weight so that you can be worthy or feel good about yourself. We are talking about this really important topic in today's episode. By the end of this episode, you're going to have learned how to undiet your menopause journey so that you can start focusing on the things that you truly want to prioritize in your life, like your happiness, your kids, your family, spending time with your loved ones, and the things that truly matter to you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. Now, it's no secret that diet culture loves to target women and make them focus on shrinking their bodies and looking a certain way so that we spend our entire lives distracted from our actual purpose, so that we spend so much of our time, energy, and mental space jumping from diet to another, trying to find the thing that is finally going to fix us or work for us. And this gets even worse if you're a woman who is going through menopause. I have personally never experienced this, but I can tell you that I listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books. And even in podcasts that have nothing to do with diet culture and menopause, these topics come up. It almost seems like it's just an agreed upon idea that women who gain weight during menopause are doing something wrong, like their bodies are defective and we need to find a diet to fix it. And because of that, there is so much pressure and shame wrapped up into it. And so I wanted to invite a special guest on today's podcast to talk about how to navigate menopause without falling into diet culture. So we are joined by Tamsin Broster, who is a body image and intuitive eating coach. Amidst her own perimenopausal challenges, she was faced with a glaring lack of anti-diet spaces where it was safe to be fat and perimenopausal. Tamsin is focused on supporting people go through perimenopause and beyond with the confidence to trust their bodies and navigate this phase in a shame-free, confident way. In this episode, we are going to share practical, actionable things to focus on so that you can feel good in your body. You can prioritize health-promoting behaviors and not constantly feel like you're failing on a weight loss journey. You're going to hear some really powerful mindset shifts for you, and we're going to unpack where all of this body shame and anti-fat bias comes from. Without further ado, I'm going to play that interview for you. Thank you so much for being on the show, Tamsin. I'm so excited to have you because as we were talking about just before we started recording, this is a topic, the topic of perimenopause, menopause, and then how do we deal with all of those changes happening in our lives in a way that supports our relationship with food and our bodies without falling into diet culture. This is a huge gap in what's going on and the kind of information that's being spread. And so you're here to shed some light on that. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. Really excited.
Amazing. So I always like to start by asking you, how did you get here? Why do you do what you do? I have my own story of why I'm so passionate about helping people. And I know that most people in the anti-diet space are the same. So what is your story?
Yeah, we all have a story, don't we? Especially with like food and body. And mine kind of started when I was in my late teens, which is typically a lot later. And I guess I was very aware of my body from when I was young. But when I was around sort of 16, 17 was when I first started to really dive into trying to shrink my body and really connecting the dots with this is how I'm valued. Like my body size has a value attached to it, and my success at dieting has an outcome and has like that will get me to where I want to be. And I pursued that for like 2 decades, and continued on until I had my second child. And my story is very typical. I would just dive in and out of different diets. I would really, really focus on, trying to be as small as possible every time. I would regain the weight, plus more, and I would dive back in harder. And I was just binging and emotional eating. All the things were going on for me. But when I had my children later, I would say, than some. I purposely left it later, but I had my kids, and then I was trying to go back to work, and I did. I went back for a year, but I started to really struggle with my hormones. Like I really, really struggled, and I didn't realize until maybe this last 12 months that that's what was happening. That I was going through the very beginning of perimenopause. I think if anyone had told me that I was going through that back then, I probably would have said no, it's just, I had post baby, all that kind of stuff. But I was, you're just about to turn 40, and I ended up leaving my job. I ended up leaving my 20-year career because I just kept completely falling apart, breaking down, and I was just so anxious all the time, and I was so stressed. So I took a break, which ended up being a permanent break. But how I got to here was that during that time when I had that space, when I took that break, I really realized like what my life had become. It had just become about being as thin as possible to try and be as successful as possible. And it was really tiring. And it's really hard to do that when you've got two small children. And I think the wake up call for me was my daughter really kind of trying to get me to spend some time with them and pay attention to them. And I was on my phone, but I wasn't doing anything exciting. I was actually just tracking my calories. And I was constantly distracted. I was never eating with my family. I was always, really hyper focused on like, this has to be this meal is going to like make or break my body size, all this kind of stuff. So, how I got to the perimenopause side of like body image stuff is after I had, started working with clients around body image and intuitive eating, I started to notice that myself and my clients were in that phase of perimenopause symptoms. And a lot of my peers as well, and like professional colleagues were anti-diet through and through, but finding there was no support. This space is just not, there's not enough people talking about this. And I think when you go into a lot of the spaces where they're trying to raise the profile of what women are experiencing, what people are experiencing in menopause, this isn't something that's talked about. It's just adding on more and more body shame and anti-fat bias. And yeah, so that's kind of like a roundabout way of why I'm here.
Yeah, wow, how fascinating. And I took some notes because I wanted to ask you some questions. You mentioned that when you're about to turn 40 is when you really started to struggle with your hormones. So what were you experiencing in your body, in how you felt? Because there might be people listening to this right now who might be feeling kind of off and aren't not sure what's happening. So how did that manifest for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I was like between like 38 and 40, I was really finding myself that every 3 weeks I would just start getting like very extreme PMS. This is like after my second child. And I thought it was something to do with maybe like postnatal depression or something like that. But actually it was like I was fine, like say fine, as fine as you can be when you're like trying to juggle a work and two small children in a society that isn't built up for that. But I really just would self-destruct in that week. And then I would completely fall apart and then be piecing myself back together. And I had not typically suffered with my hormones in that way at all previously. So this is like new. This wasn't like something that I was experiencing before. And I think I just thought it was something to do with having, two young children, two under 5. I just assumed it was to do with that and trying to go back to a job that I had climbed my way, through that career ladder and then decided to have children and then tried to go back like as if nothing had happened. So I think it was just this big perfect storm of all those things. And then getting to the age where I started to have challenges with like elderly parents and like, well, not even really elderly, but they were suffering health-wise. And that was really hard as well. And like I said, like with a workplace and systems, it doesn't matter how flexible your workplace is, it will never really be flexible enough for what you need to do to provide everything you need to do for your children, and like covering school holidays and juggling all that kind of stuff. It was a completely different world that I went back into. But that really was the main thing that I was suffering with then. Since then, obviously, I've got more symptoms that have started, like real, like the sleep, like waking up at
Mhm.
like 3 a.m. in the morning, the itchy legs, like I get really, really itchy skin, and it feels like it feels like your skin's on fire. Those kind of things. There's just so many different things that have come about since then.
Okay.
But that's when I started to piece it together. Like, oh, hang on a minute, like that, because I wasn't going through postnatal depression. I know I wasn't, looking back on it, but I just didn't know what else to put it down to, and like nobody really knew how to help me.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
you mentioned you would self-destruct. So what was your relationship with food and your body like at that time? Because you mentioned that you did over 2 decades of dieting. So what
Mm.
was your relationship with food and your body like at that time? And when did you start getting into the anti-diet space, intuitive eating? When did that shift?
Yeah, so around the same time. So I had been I had a career in dieting until I was sort of like 38. When I was around 38, I started to question it. I was going back to a famous slimming meetup, and I was with a friend. I'd had my baby. He was with me. I was carting him along to these meetings. And I remember, like, we had done it, we were doing it together and all this kind of stuff. And then she was saying to me, oh, you know, talking about somebody was there. She was like saying, oh, such and such has been here. She's been coming here for like the last 15 years. And I was like, 15 years? Hang on a minute. If we're all coming back, and this was the first diet that I had ever tried. So I was like, hang on, if I was been doing this when I was 17 and I'm now like approaching 40, this isn't going to work. And I just suddenly realized this isn't working. But I didn't know how to explain it. I just had all
Mhm.
these doubts. Then my mum got really, really poorly, and everything shifted. I was like, this is not what's important here. This I'm giving my life away to this. Like, I can't enjoy my time with my kids. I'm constantly hyper focusing on what I'm eating, and I'm constantly starving myself. I'm always trying like another diet every week, if not two at the same time, because that's going to get me there quicker. And I was just I was just anxious all the time. I was tired, I was hungry. I never felt like I was working out enough. And I had a baby, like he was less than 1 year old. And all I was trying to do was just get thin enough to go back to work so that I could look like I hadn't had a child. That was my goal.
Wow.
I just wanted to go back into the office and someone be like, oh my gosh, like you don't even look like you've had a baby. Like that was just some sort of like goal I made for myself mentally in my head. And that's where it started to unravel. I realized that it just wasn't sustainable. Um, but it took me a while to discover intuitive eating. And I don't know whether you or your listeners might resonate with this, but when I first discovered intuitive eating. I'd heard Isabel Fox and Duke talking on a podcast, and I just thought, this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
If I eat according to my body, that weight's going to fall off because I'm eating too much. And if I listen to my body, it will tell me to eat all the right things. I'll never eat the like quote unquote bad foods again. And we're going to skip off into the sunset and this is going to be great.
So you originally heard of intuitive eating, and as a lot of people do, you were like, "Oh, this is my
Yeah.
solution to weight loss."
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. And I always talk about this story because I think it's more common than people will admit. Like if you like I don't know anyone who like if you haven't unpacked your anti-fat bias, you haven't unpacked all that stuff. And then I started to do a little bit more than just, went beyond the book, and I signed up for a coaching program, and it got to like the part of body image. And at this point I'm like, yeah, I'm loving all this, loving all this. And then it was like, and your body might gain weight. You might naturally be fat. And I literally closed the laptop. I closed the lid. I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I went back. I went back to dieting and I went hard. I was like, right, this is it. I'm not accepting that. This is not happening. I hadn't unpacked any of it.
Hmm.
Um, and it took that, I'd say like one last diet to make me realize that my body doesn't want to be that size. It's not
Hmm.
sustainable for me. It kind
Yeah.
of had to go through that. And it's okay. Like, it's okay. I don't feel ashamed of that at all. I think it's just, yeah, that was how that happened.
What do you think were the fears that came up for you? Because I really like to unpack this because I know that a lot of my listeners are like raising their hand and thinking this girl is speaking my language. This is exactly how I'm feeling as well. Because you can listen to the beginning pieces of intuitive eating and you're like, I can definitely get on board with this, right? I can learn how
Yeah.
to listen to my body and I can make peace with food. But then when we get into set point weight theory and we start really digging into where your body is meant to fall at, then there could be that resistance that comes up. And so for you, when you thought about actually allowing your body to sit at the weight that it needs to be, and not trying to control it and not trying to fight it and try to mold it into a version of you that you're not meant to be. What were some of the thoughts and beliefs that you held around what it meant to be in a bigger body?
Yeah, it's such a great question because I really felt like that was just not acceptable for me. I could completely get on board with like other people and everybody being a different size and everybody like, being healthy at whatever size. I could completely get on board with that, but not me, not my body. My body had to get smaller, otherwise it was failing. There was no way that I'm very short, I'm 5 foot. So I always have had this idea in my head that I'm not supposed to be a larger woman. I'm not supposed to be in a fat body. I'm supposed to be in a, I just feared it. I feared the next size up in clothing. Everyone was like, okay, well, this is okay as long as I don't go past here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this one's okay. Okay, we can deal with this, but we can't go past here because then I can't shop there, and then I can't do this, and I can't do that. And also, there was a lot of shame around, like when you first go into no longer dieting, you can get a bit excited about it and a bit like, yeah, I don't do that. I don't control my food. I allow myself to have whatever I want. And you can be quite proud of it. And I think that's great. I really do. But I think when your body starts to change and if it starts to grow, and I think we need to be really, really honest about intuitive eating isn't a weight loss tool. And I don't think I've had any clients who have naturally just gone into a thinner body as a result of intuitive eating. And I don't think we talk about that enough, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my experience. And I think that's some people will talk about getting to your like happy weight, I guess. And a lot of people's mental version of their happy weight, this is what I had. Well, my happy weight is smaller than this. So
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was just failing and I felt like I was clinging on to every size as I like watched them go by and then you start to panic about like I can't afford clothes and I can't afford this and you start to feel that it's body shame. It is
Yeah.
just I had internalized anti-fat bias and it was just body shame that was coming up as a result of that.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get into the whole menopause, perimenopause part of it all. But I'm curious, how did you finally move past that body shame and actually allow your body to get to your happy weight? And what's interesting is we say like a happy weight and we associate the word happy with that weight. But a lot
Yeah.
of the times people will think back on their happy weight and it's like, but were you happy or were you sacrificing your mental health, your social life in order to be at that quote unquote happy weight?
Yeah, that's so true. And that's what I mean is I think it's a term that needs to be explained a bit more because people will have like an idea in their body. Well, I was happy when I was 18. I was happy on my wedding day, or I was happy at this stage, when I was at my thinnest. And actually, they were just at their thinnest and they were just being celebrated. I'm going to forget the question now. What did you ask
It
me?
was
Sorry. Oh,
how
how do
did
I unpack
you
it?
how did you unpack it? How did you move through that even though I'm sure there was a ton of resistance for you? And I can tell just by the way that you're showing up now how confident you are and how comfortable you are and you really are showing up as your truest self regardless of what your body looks like. So how did you move past that?
I had to. I got to that point where I was like, okay, so I dived right back into dieting. I went really, really hard, and I lost a bunch of weight, and I just knew I couldn't hold on to it. I could feel my body just resisting this size that I had pushed myself into. And it was became unsustainable very, very quickly, not even talking like very much weight before that became really, really unsustainable. And I knew that I couldn't keep up with the level of like workouts that I would have to do. I wasn't enjoying them. It was actually taking me away from doing your particular exercise that I movement for my body that I actually really liked, because I was being told that no, that's not what you need to do to have fat loss. This is what you need to do. So I had changed everything, and actually I really enjoyed what I was doing before, and it kind of messed with that. That was, the first thing. But I think I pushed and pushed, and I reduced what I was eating so much that I couldn't have gone any further. I physically couldn't have eaten any less. There was just no way. And then just constantly being told, well, if you just push through this bit, we can then up your calories again, and we can do this. And I was just like, this is not going to work. And I think the turning point for me was when I went for dinner with some friends. When I say dinner, they weren't eating because they were so like stressed out about like weight loss. So, and I wasn't eating because I had like a pre-planned thing. So there's three of us who see each other once a year, and if they listen to this, they'll know who they are. We see each other like once a year, and we'll go for dinner, but don't have dinner. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy. So, and I was thinking, and they were both sitting there going, "I just don't know how you found the secret. Like, I'm so jealous." And they were shaming themselves, and I thought, but these two friends are just the most beautiful, amazing beings that I have ever known. I love them to bits. And I was like, how can they think that about themselves based on just because I have shrunk myself, you know? And it made them feel so inadequate. I think it just made me realize, like, what are we all doing? Like, what are we doing? And I can just vividly remember thinking, this is crazy. We've all just met up, they've had like lemon water and I've had a Diet Coke, and we're all frightened of food. Like, this
Wow.
is just madness. So I had to really go back, and I had to go back. I had to go back to that course. I paid for it, and I thought, right, I'll start here. And I started to unpack it, and I opened that laptop and I went back in, and I was like, okay. And then I started working through more podcasts, and I started working through the books, and I just started doing the stuff. And then I thought, like, it's really cliche, like, I want to help other people. And actually, on my journey to learning and studying to do this professionally and help other people, I unpacked even more. And I would
Hmm.
say every week, every month, that I'm constantly unpacking more and more things that I know is actually has an underlying kind of weight bias or another system of oppression attached to it. And I never would just say, hey, I'm healed, this is it. There's always work to do. There
Yeah.
is always work to do, especially as a woman. Like, I'm in a small fat body. I still have some size privilege. I hold other unearned privileges. And I think if you have to constantly unpack when you
Yeah.
are, in that position. So, yeah, the work is never done.
Hmm. I completely agree. I actually experienced the exact same thing when I started coaching women as well. It's funny because I started as a weight loss coach. And when I started as a weight loss coach, I was under the impression that I was doing it to help people get healthy. And I really convinced myself of it. And as I started working with clients and I started telling people, I went on podcasts and started telling my story, I kind of started connecting the dots backwards and realizing, oh, you were very disordered. You had an eating disorder, and like it followed you for much longer than you were aware of. And as I moved and pivoted into realizing how much people's relationships with food and their bodies was impacting the quality of their lives. And it became about something so much bigger than me. It became about the system of oppression. It became about silencing women and distracting them from their truest purpose. That mission and that purpose really helped me unpack at a much faster speed. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and again, it's another cliche, but you're having kids, not even just having a daughter. Like I've got two, one of each, but I just feel like they don't need to see me just constantly shrinking and really policing my body and my food.
Hmm.
That's not a healthy way to bring them up
Hmm.
as intuitive eaters. And I can't bring them up differently than I'm willing to be myself. Like I can't model one behavior and then expect them to follow a different path.
Yeah,
It's not sustainable. So
absolutely.
yeah.
So let's touch on women who are going through perimenopause, menopause. Their hormones are changing, their body might be changing, and maybe they have been making progress in their relationship with food and their body image. And then this throws a brand new obstacle in their way. So, can you tell me what, especially the clients that you work with and in your community, what people are experiencing when they're going through perimenopause, menopause, and how diet culture plays into that?
Yeah, definitely. So what I'm seeing, and I saw it in myself too, was like your body suddenly. I don't think anyone prepares you for it. Like it's not talked about. I know my daughter's going through a lot of education around bodies and everything else. And I asked her this question: have we talked about, like, you've talked about periods starting? Have you talked about the end of those? No, they don't talk about menopause, from that early age at all. And I think this is something that, so we kind of come into it, and a lot of people will gaslight themselves like I did, thinking, oh, I can't be perimenopausal. My mom would always say to me, you can't be, you're too young. Because I don't think many people would have been talking about perimenopause when my mom would have gone through it. She was either just through it and her periods had stopped, but that's actually not it. Perimenopause can affect us 10 to 15 years before our last period. That's quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think, like, the average age was what, like 55 off the top of my head, maybe fact check that because I'm not sure that's true. Because it's different in different places. But I think, that's quite a long time to be going through something and experiencing these different symptoms. And what I'm seeing is, one of the number one things that people really struggle with is this sudden weight gain around their middle. And there is no advice out there other, when you go to the menopause experts, you can go to all the podcasts you want, because I've done it, and you go to all these podcasts, you go to all these different experts, and they are experts in menopause, but all they will be talking about is what you have to do to get rid of that weight. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it sends us back down this rabbit hole of focusing on something that actually is very natural to occur. The reason it happens is because our hormones do change and our metabolism does slow down, and we do naturally gain weight in that area. It's really, really common, but that doesn't mean it's the worst thing to ever happen to you. But because we're taught, like, we are conditioned to believe that our stomachs need to be flat,
Yeah.
the hyper focus is going to be on that area. And so many women are losing their confidence, not just because of the weight gain, that's part of it, but they're losing their confidence because suddenly they don't recognize their body. And they just keep thinking that they're going to wake up and it's not going to be like that anymore. They're not going to struggle with this stuff they're suddenly struggling with. That feeling of feeling like you actually, people believing that they're actually losing their mind. And actually, it's just the brain fog that comes with it. The tiredness, the insane amount of tiredness. If you start trying to diet over the top of that to, like, fix this problem area that isn't really an area that's a problem, you're going to be even more, it's going to exacerbate those symptoms. It's going to take you further and further away from actually doing things you enjoy, like,
Yeah.
and feeding yourself in a way you like and moving your body in a way you like.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I know that I was listening to a big, big podcast a couple of months ago, and it's not even a podcast related to diet culture, menopause, anything like that. It's a personal development podcast. And I'm listening to the host talk about how she's starting to struggle, a very thin white host who
Hmm.
is talking about how she is struggling with body image and noticing her pants getting tighter, and how she's starting to have different experts on like fasting and different things come on her podcast to talk about How do we get rid of this weight? And that's really the message that's being spread, is that once you start noticing your body change in menopause, get your shit together and do
Yeah.
whatever it takes to get rid of that weight. And it puts so much pressure on women who are already going through such a hard period in their lives. And it puts so much shame because you feel like your body is like almost working against you, like it's doing something
Mhm.
wrong when really it's doing like what it's meant to be doing.
Yeah, because there's so much shame around for women having any kind of stomach. It has to be flat. That's all we've ever told. From when I was a little girl, that's the narrative that I have always known, is that you are successful if you have this like toned abs. And pretty much anyone who has that is either genetically capable of having that, or they are putting themselves under a phenomenal amount of restriction. And people hide it. People do hide it. They would never ever admit. And sometimes, like you said, with your own journey, you don't really see it as disordered. You don't even
Mm-mm.
see the eating disorders and disordered eating that is right there in front of your eyes. To, most of us don't, because that kind of behavior is celebrated in our society, in our culture.
Yes.
That is what we are supposed to be doing. And actually, it just, like you say, it takes us so far away from even looking at those other symptoms and making ourselves, how do we help ourselves through those other symptoms when we're just really, really focused on shifting that weight at any cost,
Yeah.
you know?
I remember when I was, my fixation was on a thin stomach, but also a thigh gap, which my body is not meant to have. But I grew up as a synchronized swimmer, so I was used to seeing thigh gaps. And I remember when I started, getting thinner due to my eating disorder, I would look in the mirror and notice that I was starting to get a thigh gap and I was starting to get rid of my cellulite. And my mind would go, "You're doing something right." And people get so blind to the behaviors and the things that we need to do that we're doing to ourselves in order to get there.
Yeah, so true. It's so true.
So, if someone is experiencing their body changing and they have maybe been conditioned to believe there's something wrong, do whatever it takes to lose the weight, and they're probably doing it all: portion control, cutting out carbs, not eating sweets, cutting out alcohol. They're doing all the things and their weight is not budging. What would you say to those people? And the people who come to you, are they usually hoping that you're going to help them with weight loss?
Yes and no. I would say the majority of my clients are hoping I can help them with weight maintenance.
Okay.
They get to this point where they know they don't want to head back into dieting and restriction, because they know that it's causing them to feel really, fed up. They want to live their life. They don't want to be constantly counting every morsel. They don't want to be following those plans anymore. But they just have this kind of like size limit where I was, this kind of like, this is okay as long as I don't get any bigger. I just want to be able to handle where I'm currently at and not gain any weight, which of course I
Mm-hmm.
cannot do. I can't actually help you with that, but what I do is help my clients unpack why you feel that way, what's going on for you. And of course, I have absolutely no control over what anyone's body's going to do. And I couldn't tell you whether my clients gain weight or not, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not part of the process. But what I do know is they do get to that place where they can accept where they're at, and they can actually start taking care of their body in a way that they haven't ever done before. Because we're so conditioned to believe that dieting is us being healthy and looking after our body, but it takes us away. There is no reason why you can't pursue health behaviors and health habits or whatever it might be that prioritize your health in a way that feels good to you, that has nothing to do with size. Weight loss, I always say, like, weight loss is not a health behavior, it's an outcome. And
Yeah.
it's usually an outcome of unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah.
So, losing weight is not health behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're starting, and I'm trying to put myself in my listener's shoes who is at maybe that like rock bottom where they no longer want to keep restricting, and maybe they're hearing all of this and they're like, wow, yeah, it makes no sense if I'm feeling tired, if I'm sleeping terribly and I'm having brain fog. And then on top of that, I am restricting food and I am dieting and I feel even worse doing all of that. But they don't know where to go. If you had to give them either a couple of first steps towards body acceptance and health promoting behaviors, or I really love journaling and I love giving people reflection questions to reflect on and try to understand where their blocks are and what their mindset really is that's driving these behaviors. What would you share with our listeners?
Yeah, I love journaling too. I've
Mm-hmm.
actually, really discovered it in the last sort of few months, and I would say it really is a game changer in terms of reflection. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
similar to you. I will send them questions rather than just. I don't think it's really helpful to say to anyone, "You just love your body." Like it just, you can't love your body in a society and a culture that just constantly bombards you with messages and reasons to hate your body. That's not going to happen. And I think releasing that expectation of really loving what you see in the mirror, what I'd love to do with my clients is take them away from focusing on what their body looks like and start thinking about how does it feel? How does it
Mm-hmm.
feel to be in your body? What does it feel like when you eat in a certain way? What does it feel like when you move in a certain way? And that's a couple of really good areas that you can start to focus on, because having this assumption that so many people have an assumption that they eat too much or they don't move enough. And I'm like, okay, but how does it feel to move? Especially if you are in perimenopause or any further along that road, because so often there's joint pain, and it's like new joint pain that comes from nowhere for no reason. This is not the kind of it's not the kind of pain that you get when you have like done a really like strenuous class at the gym or something like that. This is like totally different. It's just for no reason, and it comes, a lot. And I think it's just being kinder to ourselves and really, really gently focus on what feels good for my body right now. Do I still love the things that I used to love, whether it's food, whether it's alcohol? You might want to cut down on your alcohol. You might want to increase your protein. What feels good to you? And start there and work your way out from there. And I think this is where it's really good to go inwards. Like if somebody's trying to give you advice or telling you what works for them, every single person who's going to go through menopause will experience it differently. There is
Mm-hmm.
no one size fits all. So you have to really kind of, this is the best time to go inwards. You're not looking for a plan, an eating plan, a movement plan, anything else like that. Like if you want to lift some weights, if you want to start swimming, if you want to start doing something and your body feels like it wants to do it, then you can just go to it. You can just do it. There's no rules. It could be
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes, it can be half an hour. You can do anything that makes you feel good. But the other thing I would do is if you're really struggling with body shame and your body has changed, but you don't want to go back to restriction, and you're in that space where restriction's not working for you, I would really focus in on where you have learned to feel that way about your body. Where was the first time that you knew that your body was wrong? Because if you get to the point where you can no longer stand the restriction and it's not working, but you still desire weight loss, it's likely you're like me and probably yourself. You've been doing it for decades. Like you've experience in trying to shrink your body. And I remember my first experience of thinking that my body was too big was in a ballet class when I was 6 years old. And I think, quite often we'll have clients will have stories of where their parents have body shamed them, family members, teachers, that kind of stuff. Go back to the first time that you really understood what your body should look like, and then work out from there. And then you start to layer it on. You start to realize like, oh yeah, when I was a teenager, like this was in trend. And and you start to realize that it's just a big map of layered on anti-fat bias, body shame, and beauty ideals that has kind of got you to where you are.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so good. So I'm gonna summarize. I like to think of mentally highlighting what you just said. So the first thing that you mentioned, so if you're a listener right now and you're struggling through your hormones changing and you're noticing your body changing as well, and it's really hard to accept it, and maybe you even feel like you don't recognize yourself in your body, and you think that if you lose weight then you'll finally feel like yourself again, and it feels like a constant uphill battle. And no matter what you try to do, your confidence is not showing up for you. And you want to be able to actually prioritize the things in your life that matter. That was a huge thing that you mentioned, is like knowing what actually matters, your kids, your elderly parents, your passions, like how you feel about yourself. Then the first thing that you want to focus on is, what does it feel like to eat in a certain way, to move in a certain way? And I am big on looking at the intention behind your behaviors. So am I
Hmm.
eating or moving or taking care of myself a certain way because I'm hoping it's going to shrink my body and then I'll feel good about myself? Or is the intention so that I can feel good now, regardless of what my body looks like? So the second one is to go inwards. There is always going to be someone who's going to try to give you advice on what worked for them. And I'm sure that you've experienced this before when you go on social media and literally in the span of 10 minutes, 15 people have given you 15 conflicting pieces of advice. And so when you're doing that, you're just jumping from one thing to another. And then the list of foods that you can eat gets smaller and smaller because everyone tells you that you can't eat that and you should move in a certain way. And you lose all sense of independence and autonomy because you're only listening to other people. So actually learn to trust yourself. I think that's a really big piece of it, is like learn to trust yourself and learn to listen to what feels good, what you enjoy, what is something that you could keep doing for years to come. And then the last piece is, if you're feeling a lot of shame around your body, evaluate and actually get critical about where these thoughts come from. Don't just take them as fact, because we know as a fact that the size of your body does not dictate your worth. Like, we can understand that intellectually, and I'm sure that you've known
Hmm.
that, right? You've known that about your daughter and you've known that about your friends. But until you actually unpack those beliefs yourself and you do the journaling or you talk to someone or you get coached, until you do the work, then you're not going to feel that subconsciously. And that shame is going to still drive your life.
Yeah,
Did I miss anything?
exactly.
Should I add anything?
No, but I'm going to add something.
Yes.
So the other thing that I like to talk to my clients and my in my community about is menopause, the perimenopause and beyond. Like, it's part of the same journey, is like nature's wake up call. This is going to highlight all the areas of your life that are not making you feel good. Now, that might be relationships, it might be your work situation, it might be your financial situation, it could be anything. But this is where I truly believe our body tries to shake us out of whatever it is we've accepted. And so many women, so many, are coming into this phase going, I've given my life to everybody else. I've made sure everybody else is happy and taken care of. And actually, now there's who's here for me? Like, what's the point? And what I would say is that quite often can trigger this idea that we need to like diet over the top of those issues. We need to bring those things to the surface, and really, it's frightening. And so many people, especially like with their relationships, of going, I'm not sure this relationship is serving me anymore. I'm not sure any of
Hmm.
this stuff is serving me. And we are told that we can just control how our life runs by shrinking ourselves. And as long as we've got our food and our body down, everything's going to fall into place. But this is the moment where we realize that's not happening, because our body doesn't respond in the same way that it used to. And those feelings and those thoughts just never go away, even if our body does respond to our restriction or whatever it is we're doing. We just can't, our body just will not stop until we wake up to that
Yeah.
what's going on.
That is so important. And I'm glad that we didn't leave that out, because I have spoken to so many women who are in their 50s and 60s, and they do feel that resistance towards intuitive eating and food freedom, because they know that that is going to make them face the things that they have been pushing down for years, because dieting serves as this beautiful distraction from the things that you don't want to face, like disappointment in your career or unhappiness in your relationship. So if I could just focus on making my body this project that I'm going to mold, if I can just find happiness in that part of my life, then everything else is going to be fine. And it serves as like this wonderful distraction. So eventually you're going to have to face those things, whether it's now or it's when you're 80 years old and you have a shit ton of regret because you didn't face those things earlier and actually start living the amazing life that you were meant to live. At one point, you will have to face them. And what I always say to anyone that I am always giving unsolicited advice to is to do the hard thing now. Like, do the hard thing now. It's going to be uncomfortable no matter when you do it. It's actually going to be harder when you do it later, because then you're going to have piled on a ton of things on top of that. So face those things and stop using dieting as a distraction for those things.
Yeah, I think quite often we think food is the thing we're focused on and distracted by, but actually dieting is where, I don't think anyone's really addicted to food. I think a lot of us blame that and say that we're addicted to food, but actually the addiction that we're addicted to dieting. We're just serial dieters. And I get what you're saying about, not leaving it too long, but I think this is where society really fails us as women, because we are growing up, we are told that what we need to do is get married and have kids and also have the career and also have all these things. But usually doing all those things puts us into a position where we're not financially secure. And quite often I see this struggle for women particularly, that they can't leave. And so it's really about, well, what can you do? And what can you do to change things in your life? And what boundaries can you put in? And it's about working with what you've got. So they all have, I'm sure with your listeners, you'll have lots of people in different situations. So I think it's just to say, like, don't feel ashamed if you know that that's not, you deep down you want to do something, but actually you can't. Like, I get it. Like, we get it. It's not simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not saying like quit the job, leave the husband, but more so address the things that you are not allowing yourself to address, because it's kind of like this cork that you keep pushing underwater, and it creates more pressure until eventually you let go and it like bubbles up and it creates this explosion. So it's like, actually maybe just give yourself the opportunity to get curious about it and start unpacking it little by little. You don't want to blow things up, but allow yourself to get curious and to start having those feelings and to actually experience those feelings.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Totally agree.
Wow. Well, Tamsin, thank you so much for being here. And I know that my listeners got so much value from you. So for anyone who, I know you have your own podcast, anyone who wants to connect with you, where can they find you?
I'm mostly on Instagram. I kind of hang out on Instagram. It's just Tamsin_Broster. You can find me with my name. I have a lovely Facebook community, which is growing and growing and growing, of other women who just want to get out of this cycle of dieting. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, Instagram's where I hang out mostly, but yeah.
Amazing. And what is the name of your Facebook community?
It is called Thrive, Redefining Perimenopause for Women.
Amazing. I will put the link in the show notes so that anyone who wants to join can get in there as well. And once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you listeners for being here, and I will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.